Imagine for a moment, if you will, that you've just given birth or your partner's just given birth, and the midwife asks you, is your baby lesbian or gay, straight or heterosexual? Now that might sound like quite a strange thing to be asked having just given birth, and even as I create this video, I remember reading, I think just yesterday or the day before, that the word midwife apparently is going to be offensive to some people, but I'm going to continue to use the word midwife, and I think that's perfectly acceptable. Let me know what you think in the comments. But first of all, if you would do me the favor of subscribe to the channel, help me grow the channel, and I'd really appreciate that. I have no big media company behind me. It's just me. So what are we talking about here? Well, this is actually across the pond, so to speak, to New Jersey. And this is a very real story from the Telegraph, and it relates very much to what's happening in the UK. And if we are not careful, we are going down this road of complete confusion, because this is a very real form called the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Questionnaire. And this is from the Inspira Health. They say our mission is to provide safe and compassionate experience that improves the health and well-being of our community, etc. And they provide this questionnaire on babies being born, to be completed presumably by the parents, because I don't think the baby's going to be filling out this form. It says, what sex was your baby assigned at birth? I suppose that's a perfectly reasonable question to ask. Female or male? Prefer not to answer, perhaps. But then we get into some strange territory here, and it gets even more confusing than this, but it gets into some strange territory here. It says, do you identify your baby as female or male? Now, I find this, with great respect to anyone that has genuine gender dysphoria and they don't identify with the body into which they were born, that is to say that they were born male but they identify as female or vice versa, with great respect, and I have great respect, and I appreciate how difficult that must be, this cannot be a legitimate, sensible question. Objectively, in my opinion, it just cannot be a sensible, objective question. If the baby is assigned female because the baby appears female, female genitalia and so on, or male because they are identified as male, that is it. As far as anyone is concerned at that point in time, nobody can really say any different. Now, it may be that that baby grows up and does not identify with the body into which they were born. That is a genuine issue that a lot of people face. But where this form asks, do you identify your baby as male or female? This, is it not, is setting up this baby and everyone caring for this baby for a whole range of difficult issues. But then it gets worse. It then says, do you identify your baby as transgender female, trans woman, male to female? So this form is asking parents whether they identify the baby having just been born, newborn. You can see it says newborn on the form here. Do the parents identify this newborn baby as a trans baby male to female? Or the other way around, a transgender male, trans man, female to male. So actually born female, but they identify this baby as male. Or gender queer, and I'm still not quite sure what that is and what that really means, but then it says neither exclusively male nor female. So I don't fully understand that, I confess. But then additional gender category, self-described, please specify, so you can make something up. But then it goes on to ask you as well, in addition to all of those things, and I'm reminded of a conversation I had on X yesterday about I'll try and find it and bring it on screen if I remember to find it, but the flowchart that was presented in the For Women Scotland case at the Supreme Court in the UK to determine whether or not someone is a woman or not. And so, as I recall, if you were a man with a GRC but with a partner who's female without a GRC, somehow you're lesbian. I kid you not, I'll find the flowchart and I'll put it on screen after in the edit. But then this goes on to say, with a newborn baby, remember, that you're identifying whether you're, first it asks you the question, was it assigned female or male at birth? But then what do you identify it as? And then what best describes your baby, lesbian or gay, straight, heterosexual or bisexual? I'm sorry, but I mean this with the greatest respect, but how on earth would anyone possibly know that of a baby? This is a completely ridiculous question. Even if it's meant as sincerely as possible, it's just utterly ridiculous. But that's what's going on here, and they say that they've created this form to comply with the new law under New Jersey state law. And this was a genuine form distributed by hospitals to ask patients about their newborn baby, about all these things. Lawmakers said that the form was not required to be filled out for patients so young. However, the group which represents the hospital distributing the form insisted that it's a legal requirement. I am beside myself, but why is this such an issue? Because you may remember a video I did not too long ago, and I show you here a tweet from Michelle Dewberry of GB News, posting my video from previously, so I'll link this again in the description below, where she experienced a difficulty in Virgin Active, where basically a man was in the female changing rooms, self-identifying as a man. She queried this with Virgin Active, and they said that their policy is that they allow people to use these facilities as best they best describe themselves. And I think this is unacceptable. My personal opinion here, I think this is unacceptable. Even if they have a GRC, I think it's unacceptable. That's my personal opinion, and I'm entitled to express that. I'm entitled to express that in robust terms. I'm not being discriminatory. I'm not being rude. I say that with the greatest respect, but even with a GRC, I don't think it's acceptable. Because there is a legal exemption under the Equality Act, Schedule 3, that allows companies like Virgin Active to restrict and exclude anyone who is of the opposite biological sex from using that single-sex space. So I'll link that video below. I go into greater detail there. You can watch that and hear about Michelle's difficulty with Virgin Active there. Now, even when we come to non-binary, this went to the Supreme Court regarding passports. In essence, the Passport Office did not permit a third box, so it was male or female. There was no third box for non-binary. And so this ended up again at the Supreme Court. Now, the court found here that the current policy of the Passport Office not to permit the appellant to apply and be issued with a passport with an X marker, the third category, does not at present amount to an unlawful breach of the appellant's Article 8 private life rights. Now, of course, the court did note that the way that somebody identifies is absolutely part of your private life, etc. But in essence, it doesn't mean that the state has to provide that third option. Now, one thing that is seriously at risk here, which we are imminently, I'm not sure when, but we are imminently waiting a result in the For Women Scotland case from the Supreme Court. This case, a lot of people have misunderstood what this case was actually about, but it was nothing to do with self-identification. This was concerned with those that have been issued with a gender recognition certificate under the Gender Recognition Act, having already been established that for the purposes of the Equality Act and or other laws, people who identify as the opposite sex or non-binary remain legally their biological sex, which is why particularly those that don't have a GRC should not be in the opposite sex changing rooms, in this case here with Michelle's case. This case was specifically about the guidance which said that a woman includes a person whose acquired gender is female under the Gender Recognition Act. So the main arguments here summarised, this is on the Sex Matters website, and that flowchart that I mentioned is further down on this page. The Scottish Government's argument said that the GRA, the Gender Recognition Act, says that when a person gets a gender recognition certificate, their sex changes for all purposes to be that as their acquired gender. And for all purposes was already covered to cover only for legal purposes, and that the Gender Recognition Act goes on to expressly limit the for all purposes clause in several respects, including parenthood, sex-specific crimes and inheritance. The Scottish Government argued that since the Equality Act postdated the GRA, must be taken to be among the purposes for which the GRC changes a person's sex. And the Scottish Government argued that since the Equality Act 2010 postdated the GRA, the Gender Recognition Act 2004, it must be taken to be among the purposes for which a gender recognition certificate changes a person's sex, i.e. protecting their acquired sex. That was inherently their argument. The EHRC's position was something in the middle. It focused on the Equality Act and said that as a matter of law, it does change the person's sex, but would be better if it didn't, and Parliament should act to fix the problem, thus expressly disapplying the Gender Recognition Act from the Equality Act, because we've got these two that somewhat don't work together very well. We have the Equality Act saying that women have a specific protection and men have specific protection, but the Gender Recognition Act says you can switch between the two. So the simple argument here is you cannot protect one if the other one can change into that one, and then where's the protection gone? The protection, essentially, in many respects, has just vanished, in my view, obviously. And again, I say that respectfully, but that's the way that I see it. Amnesty agreed that the gender recognition certificate changes the person's sex for the purposes of the Equality Act, although they go even further and they support gender self-identification, meaning that they say the gender recognition certificate is not necessary for someone to count as a member of the opposite sex, or indeed as non-binary or gender fluid. And for what it's worth, personal opinion, I don't agree with that either. For Women Scotland's central point was that the Equality Act was replacing the Sex Discrimination Act of 1975. So it was updating and modernising the protection with various protected characteristics, but in this case, specifically man and woman, meaning biological sex of a man and a woman. They were unambiguously sex-based terms. Now, that would be the absolute reality in biology, in my view, and that any change to that baseline could not possibly have been what Parliament intended when passing the Gender Recognition Act. And I tend to agree, because I would say that the Gender Recognition Act would say that if somebody does not identify with the body into which they are born, they obtain the certificate. Therefore, if somebody were directly and unfairly and unlawfully discriminating against that person because they've been through that process, then that would be unlawful unless there's a legitimate reason to do so. And the example would be male or female changing spaces, as just one example, which should remain protected for men and women. And so you can see the inherent problems that we're going to have here if the Supreme Court decides that the GRC changes the person's sex for the purposes of the Equality Act. In essence, quite arguably, it is going to remove the protection for biological women in that category under the Equality Act because the GRC just overrides that protection. Again, this is somewhat my view. Let me know what you think in the comments. But this is the flowchart that was handed up to show exactly what would happen and how this would have to be decided. So it starts, what sex are you? Let's say you start male. Do you have a GRC? Then we follow the yes. Let's say that we follow the yes arrow, blue, going down. And then it asks, what sex is your partner? If your partner is female, then do they have a GRC? And if the answer is no, so it's a female without a GRC, then this biological male is then a lesbian. And you can do this the other way around as well. You can say, start with what sex are you? Female with a GRC, with a partner who is male, with no GRC, then somehow that biological woman is gay as opposed to lesbian. So you can see the very real problems we are going to have with this on a daily basis across the country if we've already got places like Virgin Active allowing biological men to self-ID as women and access female changing rooms. I've read stories about places in the States forcing girls in changing rooms to undress in front of transgender girls, so that is to say a biological boy in the girls' changing rooms. And I just think that's abhorrent, quite frankly. But also now we get these forms asking you to identify what your baby is, and I think this is utterly ridiculous. Now, albeit this is in the States, I think it's only a matter of time before it comes here, unless this is just clarified for all concerned. Now, I reiterate that this video is meant with the greatest respect to those that suffer gender dysphoria. It is not intended to upset anybody. It is a real thing that people experience, and so please, any comments and anything that you do or say, please be mindful, be respectful. No insults, please. But otherwise, do let me know your thoughts and comments in the box below, politely and respectfully, please. And with that, please do subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you next time.